Open the damn door. The receiver crackled suddenly. And a hoarse voice spilled from the speaker, Mikhail. Jesus, Yeah, come on up. I pulled the door open and wasted no time in bothering myself with the elevator. I dashed up the stairs to the second floor, and marched down the corridor to his room. The door was open slightly, the deadbolt resting on the frame. I had barely even rapped on the door twice before Jim pulled it open, his eyes wide and a revolver in his right hand. For Christ's sake. I flinched and almost fell backwards at the sight of the weapon's maw staring me in the face. Jim lowered it and spoke through deep breaths and an apparent lump in his throat. I had to make sure it was you, Mike. You heard me on whatever. I said, perplexed by Jim's evidently rampant paranoia but unwilling to make him feel any more uncomfortable than he already was. It's me, man. It's me. What the hell is this all about? I asked, gesturing at the weapon. You better come in. He said. I followed Jim into his dimly lit apartment. I had expected it to be far messier than it actually was. There were no takeout boxes littering the floor or sloppily stacked up on top of one another, and no offensive smells emanated from the kitchen. Jim had clearly been drinking, however. On his coffee table sat a quarter-full bottle of cognac, next to a cheap-looking whiskey glass. How long you been working on that? I said with a spiritless chuckle, couple days, I guess. Strong stuff. You want any? His words swayed like a tree in the breeze. I'm good. Jim, I'm gonna be frank with you, I came here from the station. I saw the newspaper and Alverson needs you to get in touch with the Jefferson Herald and tell them to pull that head. Fuck Alverson. Those were not words spoken by the liquid voice in his blood. They were assured, steady, and serious. Fuck Alverson and fuck his callous bullshit. He's handled this about as well as a blind shrew in a knife fight. I wouldn't even dream of bringing what I found out to him because he'd have me in jail before I'd even got the whole story out. And believe you me, Mike, I found some stuff out. I found some goddamn stuff out. What did you find out? I asked, bewildered. You're gonna think I'm just a drunk asshole who snapped at the sight of too many spilled internal organs. But you're my closest damn friend here, and I trust you're gonna listen to me. I'm listening. I said, firstly, yeah. I did give the Herald that information, and there is no way in hell I'm having them pull the story. No one is safe here, and they need to know what's going on so they can take as many precautions as they can. The killer has no connections to any of the victims. Anyone could be the next casualty. Hold on. You think you know who the killer is? He gave me a steely, sincere look. My blood ran cold as disbelief flooded my veins. Jim was completely serious. Somewhere inside my head, logic and fantasy were locked in a fierce duel, and fantasy was winning. Jim. I said through nervous breaths. Do you know who the killer is? If you do, how the hell did you find out? I'm not a detective, Mike. Shit, I'm barely a police officer. But, I think I might actually have some idea. Go on. Jim poured himself another shallow glass of cognac. I used to frequent a bar downtown, the Fox Hole, you know it. There was a retired old park ranger who would always be there on Friday nights, and he had a catalog of stories from his time, and we'd all sit around and listen to him. One night, I wanna say about 6 months ago, he told a story that he said was his last call before he retired. It happened last year. Went like this: a hiking party of about 6 people got stranded in the deep woods in Mount Pilchuck State Park, wandered off the trail by accident I guess. 2 of the 6 people came back. 2. A woman named Estelle Palmer and a man named Reuben Grundy. Grundy was in a hell of a state when the Rangers found them, allegedly said that he had no idea where the other 4 people had gone, that they had wandered off into the night. Here's where it gets even weirder. Palmer said that the night before they had been found, there were still 3 of them, another man I think. Palmer had been in and out of sleep, and swore that she saw Grundy follow the other guy into the woods when he was going to piss or something. The man never came back, but Grundy did 10 minutes later. She said he looked different, thinner, taller, and insisted that he'd had blood all around his mouth. She'd felt this overwhelming fear and just pretended like she was asleep. Of course, her story was written off as delirious rambling. Jim cleared his throat and took another swig. Something about the story just kinda gave me a genuine feeling of dread that none of this guy's other stories had quite done. Then, the old bastard puts the cherry on top. A week later the US Forest Service finds remains in the woods with what were presumed to be human teeth marks on them, but they're so pulverized that they can't place exactly who they were. Grundy and Palmer are both interviewed again, but nothing comes of it. Palmer even tells the same story and says that she knows what she saw, but they write it off again. I told the old man before closing time that night that he'd scared the hell out of me, but that I didn't believe him, and he just looked at me with this deadpan expression and said, "Look it up, son." So, I did, and what do you know? It happened. Multiple different news sources covered the story. It fucking happened. Was barely covered on TV, right? I started. But Pilchuck State Park is huge, the surrounding area is. Reuben Grundy lives in Torkton, Mike. He owns a ranch. He fumbled around with a mess of documents on the coffee table. Estelle Palmer used to live in Torkton too, literally a quarter-mile down the road from Grundy. She'd lived here her whole life, by the look of things. Are those police records? I asked. Jim gave me an irritated side eye and continued. Point is, after she came back from that expedition, she moved 4 towns away. Packed up and left in about a week, sold the farmhouse she lived in to someone who'd been on her ass about buying it for years. Her childhood home, from what I read. Whether or not Reuben Grundy was responsible for those people disappearing, she saw something happen in those woods that made it so she couldn't even stand to be near him. Logic struggled onwards in its ongoing battle inside my brain. It strained and strained, but superstition's blade was far too sharp. Maybe she was a whack job. I said. You know what towny folks are like, live in the same place all their lives and clean bill of mental health. Jim exclaimed, waving a crumpled medical record in my face, clearly taken from a local clinic. No history of schizophrenia, depression, BPD, or even so much as a panic attack. No prescribed medications. It's entirely possible that we could put what she saw down to hunger, dehydration, or on the off chance maybe even the delayed effects of a hallucinogenic trip. But the fact of the matter is, this woman up and left in a matter of days after that incident. It's not like Torkton's right next door to Mount Pilchuck either. Jim dropped the medical record to the floor and shakily pulled up another document. He was excited, or terrified, or both, so, look here. Her new address is in May Creek. Jim, you're chasing a roller coaster of a story here. I said, if we take this to Alverson he's gonna give us a whole spiel about how we're idiots and then take it upon himself to rehire me just so he can fire me. We take it to Evans and he's gonna think we're on a wild goose chase, because he's a guy who deals with career criminals in Seattle and the odd home invasion. He's probably been with the force for what, 2-3 years. Face it, Mike. Our higher-ups are stuck scratching their heads and we might actually have a lead. I know it sounds crazy, I know it's a long shot, and it's dumb luck that I heard that story, but we may have an actual suspect. In the moment, Jim's obsessive joining of the dots had rendered me dumbfounded, unable to think straight. So you're saying the killer is Reuben Grundy? Jim blurted out. Maybe I am just another drunk asshole who wishes he was a big shot detective and maybe I'm completely wrong. But if there's even a chance that I'm right, we have to do something. Jim had a point, even in the midst of his fanatical behavior. Alverson didn't care and Evans, despite leading the charge, was being eaten up by his own fear. I saw it screaming behind his eyes the night of Sally McMahon's murder. Alright, what's the plan? I asked, We visit Estelle Palmer in May Creek and we ask her about Grundy. Jim said through shaking breaths. What he was like, if he seemed different during or after the hiking trip, all that jazz. If we can convince her to help us beyond just talking to us, then maybe we actually have a chance at communicating it to Evans. Either that or she chases us out of her house with a double barrel for even asking. I said dryly, ever the pessimist. Jim retorted. I laughed. Get some fresh clothes on, sober up and let's get our asses to May Creek. Jim and I arrived at Estelle Palmer's residence in May Creek an hour later, having backtracked along numerous roads due to the exhausted GPS in my car. We parked across from Palmer's house, number 5, Fairbank Street. The place was not at all what I had anticipated. I had expected us to pull up next to an overgrown lawn brimming with tall weeds, and a crudely arranged patio that led up to a dingy porch with a grimy screen door. Perhaps there would have been a sign hammered onto the wall made of plywood, and scrawled on it in red paint would have been the words, "Trespassers will be shot." It was nothing like that. If anything, it was not unlike any of the other idyllic-looking houses in May Creek. The lawn was a healthy burst of green, each blade of grass seemingly trimmed down to exactly the same size, and just by the curb lay a toy truck that must have belonged to a child. Jim swept his hair out of his eyes and opened the door of the car. Well, here goes. We either get our answers or we get a door slammed in our faces. We approached the door, peering through the living room window and catching sight of a woman sitting in a reclining chair, watching a young boy of no more than 3 years of age playing on the floor. She looked up as Jim rang the doorbell and stood up to exit the living room, motioning to the toddler to stay where he was. Estelle Palmer swung the door open, a sense of immediate irritation glinting in her eyes. She was about 38 years of age, with long dirty blonde hair that fell to her shoulders. Noticing her annoyance, I began to speak. "Mrs. Palmer. Mississippi. I'm not married." Estelle said, "Right. Miss Palmer." Jim took over. "My name's Jim McAllister and this is Mikhail Lemansky. We don't mean to upset you but we're cops." She snapped. Jim was visibly surprised. "I figured. Where you from?" "Sultan." "Don't tell me you're from Seattle." "Torkton." I said, her glare narrowed even further. "It's our understanding that you used to live there." "Yes." "What's it to you?" She seemed even more defensive now. "We came to inquire about." Jim struggled over unnecessary eloquence, even though he fully expected to receive the cold shoulder. Miss Palmer's irritation reached its peak and she began to shut the door. "It's about Reuben Grundy." Jim finally managed. She stopped and peered through the crack between the frame and the door. Her annoyance had dissipated, and worry flooded her eyes. "You can come in," she finally said, ushering us inside. The interior of the house was as picturesque as the exterior, the staircase adorned with paintings of famous North American mountains, the kitchen clean and well organized. Estelle led us into the living room, where the boy, who I presumed to be her son, looked up at us with that wide-eyed, curious expression that is so common in young children. "Baby, go play in your room, okay?" Estelle said to the boy. He looked down at the plastic dinosaur he was playing with, then back at his mother, before picking up the toy and sauntering down to the end of the hallway. Before Jim or I could get a word out about how sweet her kid was, her worrisome expression returned. "I haven't seen Reuben in over a year."